parents called my children a burden and refused to babysit them. "Take them away," said my mom. So I took my children and took the car I bought them a month ago, and then my dad. I thought my parents would enjoy spending time with their grandchildren. My wife and I had an important business trip out of state, and we needed someone to watch the kids for a week. My parents were an obvious choice. They always talked about how much they loved being grandparents. My mom posted pictures of the kids on Facebook, calling them her little angels. My dad would tell his friends how proud he was to have grandchildren. Every time we visited, they made such a big show of how much they adored the kids. So when I asked if they could babysit, I didn't expect any problems. They agreed without hesitation, telling me to go and not to worry. We dropped the kids off at their house, gave them what they needed, and left for our trip, thinking everything would be fine. Things seemed normal for the first few days. My mother sent short messages about how the kids were doing, mostly general updates. The kids were eating well. They were playing in the backyard. They went to bed on time. Everything was going well. Then, on the 5th day, the tone of her messages began to change. She started complaining about how exhausting it was to have kids around all the time. She said my dad was getting headaches and that they hadn't had a moment's peace. I thought she was just blowing off steam. Taking care of kids can be tiring, sure, but it was only for 2 more days. I didn't take it too seriously. The next morning I woke up to a missed call from my mother. I called right back and the first thing she said was, "You have to take her away. We can't do this anymore." At first I thought she was joking. I actually laughed. But she wasn't laughing. "We didn't sign up for this," she snapped. "They're a burden. We hired a nanny. She'll take care of them until you get back." I felt my whole body tense. A burden? These were her own grandchildren. I asked if something had happened, if the children were misbehaving, if there was an emergency. But she just scoffed. "We're too old for this," she said. "We are not your free babysitters." I couldn't even speak for a few seconds. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, who always acted like the perfect, loving grandparents, had just left my children with a stranger because they were tired of looking after them for a few days. I asked about the nanny they had hired, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother simply said that she was someone professional, and that she had good reviews. That was it. They had dumped my kids on a stranger without even consulting me. I wanted to explode. But I had no choice. I called the nanny myself, confirmed that she was legitimate, and made sure my children were safe. I had to keep my anger in check until we got back. When we landed, I didn't even go home first. I went straight to my parents' house. I expected them to feel some kind of guilt, to show at least a little remorse. But when I walked in, they were sitting on the couch as if nothing had happened. My dad muted the TV. My mom barely looked up. "So dramatic," she said. "It's not the end of the world." I stared at them, waiting for some kind of explanation. My dad just sighed. "You act like we left her out on the street," he said. "We hired someone. You should be thanking us." I felt something inside me snap. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just turned around, got in my car, picked up my kids, and drove home. That was the last time I let them have any control over my life. But they had no idea what was coming. I didn't say a word to my parents after that. I went home, unpacked, spent time with my kids, and tried to calm down. But I couldn't shake the anger. It wasn't just what they'd done, it was what it meant. They saw my children as an inconvenience, something to be discarded when it no longer suited them. And the worst part? They didn't even think they'd done anything wrong. As soon as we landed, I drove straight from the airport to pick up my children, not from my parents' house, but from the nanny they had hired. A complete stranger with whom they had left my children because they needed a break. At least the woman seemed decent. She was professional and kind, and the kids were fine. But that wasn't the point. The point was that my parents had made a decision. And now so had I. The next morning, my wife and I sat down to talk about it. She was just as angry, but told me to sleep on it before making any big decisions. But when I woke up, my mind was clearer, and I knew exactly what had to happen. I wasn't going to beg them to be involved in my children's lives. If they saw them as a burden, fine. They wouldn't have to deal with that burden ever again. I sent a quick note to my mother. We won't be coming over anymore. Don't worry about babysitting, you're officially off the job. No anger, no accusations. Just the truth. She didn't answer right away, but a few hours later she sent it back. Don't be ridiculous. We love the kids, we just needed a break. You're overreacting. I didn't respond. I let the silence speak for itself. A few days went by, and I expected them to reach out, apologize, try to make things right. But instead, something else happened. I was out getting groceries when I got a call from my dad. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. As soon as I answered, he skipped the pleasantries. Where's the car? I frowned. What? The car. The one we let you borrow. I blinked, confused. The car I bought a month ago? Silence. Then he scoffed. Don't play dumb. The car is in my name. Now I was really confused. No, it's not. I had bought the car with my own money, signed the papers myself, and everything was in my name. My father had nothing to do with it. He huffed. Your mother and I helped with the down payment. That was a complete lie. They hadn't given me a dime. Before I could say anything, he continued. We let you borrow it, and now we want it back. We don't think it's fair for you to ignore us while you drive around in something we helped make. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. You haven't contributed a dime. That's not the point. He snapped. The point is that you owe us. I could feel the anger rising again. Not only had they tossed my kids aside like they were nothing, but now they were trying to take something from me just because I wouldn't grovel at their feet. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, if you think you have a right to this car, go ahead and take me to court. Then I hung up. An hour later, my mother texted me. This is how you treat your family? After all we've done for you? That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the car. This wasn't even about the kids. This was about control. They were used to having power over me, and now that I was standing up for myself, they didn't know what to do. But the thing is, I wasn't done yet. If they thought they could manipulate me into crawling back, they had no idea what was coming next. I expected them to back off after I stopped the car nonsense, but my parents had never been the type to accept boundaries. If they couldn't manipulate me with guilt, they would try something else. 2 days later, I was coming home from work when I saw something strange: my parents' car parked in my driveway. I felt my stomach tighten. They hadn't told me they were coming. They hadn't even asked. I went inside, and sure enough, my mom and dad were sitting in my living room. My wife was standing near the kitchen with her arms crossed. She looked pissed. The kids were in the playroom, thankfully out of earshot. I didn't even get a chance to ask what they were doing here before my mom spoke. We need to talk. You're being incredibly unfair. I threw my keys on the counter. Unfair? You can't just cut us off because of one mistake. I stared at her. One mistake? We didn't mean anything by it. She huffed. We were tired. We were overwhelmed. But we love our grandchildren, and you're punishing us for no reason. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the same excuse they always used. When they did something cruel, it was never their fault. It was stress, or a misunderstanding, or my overreaction. I shook my head. You hired a nanny behind my back, dumped my kids with a stranger, and now you're acting like I'm the problem. My dad jumped in. It wasn't that serious. You're being dramatic. Then why are you here? They both fell silent. That's when I realized something. They weren't here because they felt guilty. They were here because they had lost control. They were so used to having me come back, to making me question myself, that they didn't know what to do when I didn't move. I sighed. You're not going to make me feel guilty about letting you walk all over me again. My mother's face twitched. Fine. She stood and grabbed her purse. If you want to be stubborn, we'll see what happens when the will is read. I blinked. What? My father stood up too, shaking his head. You think you don't need us? Fine. Just don't come crawling back when we're gone and you realize you threw it all away. I stared at them, trying to process what they were saying. They were threatening me with their inheritance. I couldn't believe it. I almost laughed. Are you serious? My mother shrugged. If you don't want to be a part of this family, you won't be a part of it when we're gone. I should have been angry. But honestly, I felt relieved. Because it just proved what I had always suspected. Their love came with strings attached. They weren't upset because they missed me or the kids. They were upset because they couldn't hold things over my head anymore. I leaned against the counter. Keep your money. I don't need it. That clearly wasn't the answer they were expecting. My mother's eyes widened and my father's face twitched in frustration. You don't mean that, my mother said. You have children. You could use the help. I shrugged. We're doing fine without you. They just stood there, completely taken aback. For the first time in my life, they didn't have the upper hand. I went to the door and opened it. You should go. For a second, I thought my mom was going to argue. But she just scoffed, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. My dad followed, shaking his head like I was the disappointment. I watched them get into their car and drive away. I thought that was the end of it. But I was wrong. Because 2 days later, my mother called me again, this time begging for help. 2 days went by without a word from them. I thought they had finally accepted that I wasn't going to play their games. Maybe they'd sulk for a few weeks, complain to their friends about how cruel I was, and then move on. I was wrong. The third morning, my phone rang. My mom's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. The second I answered, she was talking, her voice desperate. Brian, you have to help us. I frowned. What's going on? She let out a shaky breath. Your father, he's lost the car. I paused, trying to make sense of this. Lost it? It was repossessed, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. That took me by surprise. My dad always acted like he was in control. But if the car was repossessed, that meant they were seriously behind on their payments. Then it hit me. The car they lost? It was my old car, the one I had traded in a month earlier when I bought my new car. You see, when I got my new car, I didn't want to deal with selling the old one myself, so I traded it in at the dealership. It was still in good shape, but I was done with it. Apparently, my dad had somehow managed to buy it back, probably thinking he was getting a deal. Only he hadn't realized that financing an old car with high interest rates wasn't the same as getting a bargain. And now, after all their smugness, after trying to take my car, after kicking my kids out like they were nothing, they had lost the very car they took from me. Karma worked fast. I let out a slow breath. What do you want me to do about it? We need money, she said quickly. Just a loan. We'll pay you back. I almost laughed. Just a few days ago, they were threatening to cut me out of their will because I wouldn't grovel at their feet. And now they needed my help? No. Silence. Then she stammered. No. Brian, we're your parents. And we raised you. We gave you everything. And now, when we need you, you turn your back on us? I sighed. You didn't need me when you kicked my kids out of your house. You didn't need me when you tried to take my car. But now you need me? She started to say something, but I cut her off. Sell some of your stuff. Figure it out. I hung up the phone before she could argue. I told my wife what had happened and she just shook her head. They'll keep trying. They think they can guilt you into cleaning up their mess. She was right. Because the next day, my dad showed up at my house. Uninvited. I opened the door, and there he was, looking furious. I can't believe you, he snapped. After everything we've done for you, you won't even help your own parents? I crossed my arms. You mean the parents who just threatened to cut me off? He waved his hand as if that was irrelevant. That was different. We were upset. I shook my head. Not my problem. Brian, he said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. You don't want to do this. I stared at him. What exactly are you threatening me with? He clenched his jaw but didn't answer. Instead, he tried another approach. You owe us, son. We took care of you for 18 years. You wouldn't have anything without us. I felt something cold in my chest. That's what this is about, huh? You think raising me means I owe you for the rest of my life? He just stared at me, as if he didn't see anything wrong with that logic. I stepped back and pushed the door halfway shut. I don't owe you anything. Now leave. His face turned red. You think you're better than us now? You think you don't need a family? I smiled. Not the kind of family that tries to manipulate me every chance they get. His eyes darkened. You'll regret this. I shrugged. Doubt it. Then I slammed the door in his face. I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, my wife called me into the kitchen. She held up her phone. You have to see this. It was my mother's Facebook page. And she had made a very public post about me. My mom's Facebook post was exactly what I expected: dramatic, self-pitying, and completely dishonest. She portrayed herself as a loving mother who had given everything to her ungrateful son, only to be abandoned when she and my father fell on hard times. She didn't mention kicking my kids out. She didn't mention trying to steal my car. Instead, she wrote about how I had turned my back on my family and refused to help in their time of need. The worst part? People ate it up. Comments poured in from relatives and old family friends, all offering their condolences. Some said they couldn't believe I would treat my own parents this way. Others implied that I was being selfish, that no matter what, family should always come first. A few even suggested that I had become arrogant, that perhaps success had gone to my head. I wasn't surprised, but it still made my blood boil. They had spent years carefully crafting this image of themselves as loving, selfless parents. No one outside the family knew the truth. At first, I considered responding. I could have laid it all out: the way they treated my children, the way they tried to manipulate me, the fact that they were only in this situation because of their own bad choices. But I stopped myself. My parents thrived on drama. They wanted me to react. They wanted to drag me into a public fight where they could play the victim. So I did nothing. I let them have their little performance. Then something unexpected happened. Later that afternoon, I received a message from my aunt, my mother's older sister. We weren't particularly close, but she had always been the black sheep of the family, the one person who wouldn't go along with my parents' nonsense. Her message was brief. Call me. Now. Curious, I dialed her number. She answered right away. She didn't even say hello. Do you know what's really going on? I frowned. What do you mean? Your parents didn't just lose their car. They're in a lot deeper than that. I leaned against the counter. How do you know that? Because your mom called me before she posted that sob story online. She was crying about how they were losing everything and needed money. When I asked why, she got cagey. So I did some digging. I waited, my stomach clenching. They're drowning in debt, she said. Credit cards maxed out, second mortgage on the house, loans they can't afford. And from what I could tell, they were counting on you to bail them out. It made sense. My dad had always been obsessed with status, having the nicest house, the latest gadgets, acting like he was better than everyone else. My mother was no different, constantly trying to impress people with expensive vacations and designer clothes. It was no surprise that they had been living beyond their means for years. And now reality had finally caught up with them. I rubbed my temples. Why are you telling me this? She sighed. Because I know them, Brian. They won't stop at guilt. If they're that desperate, they'll escalate. She wasn't wrong. My parents had never accepted consequences in their lives. If manipulation didn't work, they'd try something worse. I thanked her and hung up, trying to process. A week ago, I had left my children with their grandparents, thinking they were in a safe place. Now I realized my parents' whole life was a lie, and they were about to drag me into the mess they had created. But I had no idea how bad it would get. It was too much of a coincidence. The moment I took my children back and refused to let my parents have control over me, their world suddenly began to fall apart. They lost their car. They were drowning in debt. They begged for money. I wasn't stupid. I knew my parents. They were manipulative, but they weren't ruthless. For them to be so desperate, something else had to be going on. So I started digging. It didn't take long to find out. My aunt was right, my parents had been living on credit for years. But what she didn't know was that they had planned for something like this. They had counted on my financial stability. They expected that eventually they'd be able to guilt me into supporting them. And worse, they weren't playing this game alone. Several relatives were in on it. Old uncles, distant cousins, people I barely spoke to had been subtly pushing the idea of family helping family for months. They weren't just on the sidelines. They expected to benefit. My parents had promised them that if things got tough, I would step in. The moment I took my kids back and shut them down, their whole plan collapsed. They never expected me to say no. I didn't tell my parents what I knew right away. I wanted to see if they'd come clean. So my wife and I went to their house one last time. The moment we walked in, my mother acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, gestured for us to sit down, and started talking about nonsense, how she had been thinking about redecorating, how the neighbors had a new car. My father just sat there, arms folded, waiting. I didn't play along. I got right to the point. "I know you lied," I said. "I know this was a setup." My mom's face barely changed, but she blinked a little too fast. My dad, on the other hand, let out an exasperated sigh. "Who told you that?" he muttered. I almost laughed. He wasn't even going to deny it. My wife, who had been silent until then, suddenly stood up. And before I could react, she grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it over, sending every single plate, cup, and bowl crashing to the floor. I had never seen her like that. "You gave my children to a stranger," she screamed. "You lied, you manipulated, and now you have the nerve to act like we owe you?" My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. My father shot up from his chair, but I stepped in front of him before he could say a word. "You will never see our children again," I said, my voice calm. "You don't deserve it." My mother's face crumpled. "Brian, no dash. You're done," I said. "With me, with my wife, with my kids. And since you're so obsessed with my car, let me make this clear, you're never going to see it again." My father clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to losing. I didn't give them a chance to respond. I took my wife's hand, turned and walked out. They called. They texted. They tried to send relatives after us. But it was over.